Hello and welcome to a special video where I get a sit down chat with the legend that is John Avon. As you'll be able to tell, I'm a huge fan of John and his work. I really appreciate with how open and honest he was with our conversations. A lot of what he said really resonated with me, and I think we can all relate to that feeling of not quite fitting in or not quite feeling good enough. John has been hugely successful and created some truly beautiful pieces of artwork that have brought the joy to so many fantasy and Magic the Gathering fans. In a Magic the Gathering, we found a really accepting and supportive group of people, or as John says, a magical gathering of mates. I hope you enjoy the video. Hi, it's Alex from Really Pretty MTG, and I have the absolute honour to be sat here with the legend that is John Avon. John, thank you for sitting down with me.
Gosh, thank you.
No, it's honestly, it's an absolute honour and an absolute pleasure of mine. I thought we'd start roughly towards the beginning. I appreciate your time is limited, but tell us a little bit about your art and how you started.
I started doing art when I was very, very little because it's the only thing that I did that I was any good at, I suppose.
Sure.
And my sister always painted and drew, and it just seemed something that was a way to anchor my emotions into the moment. I mean, when you're little, you don't really know anything about psychology and philosophy, obviously, because you're little, but we all have a need to do things. Mine wasn't. I'm looking at a cricketer over there looking very healthy and fit and well, and I was not into sport at all.
Sure.
And I wasn't very competitive in that way, so anything that seemed to calm me down and that I did consistently was drawing pictures.
Yeah. I think it's finding that loophole into what you do, sorry, the gateway into what you do and that passion. So did that build up through your teenage years or through your childhood into teenage years?
Yes, I mean, when we all go to school, there's the traditional stuff you have to learn. And I was average to very, very bad at everything, but the only thing that I ever did that gave me any sense of worth was doing my pictures. And I suppose I think back to the early 70s, which is about 1,000 years ago. It was weird at school because all the kids who were quite disruptive, to put it politely, in the school, they all ended up in the art department.
Okay.
They had nowhere else to put them.
Sure.
So I kind of thought that art felt like very much something that proper people didn't do, but it was all I could do anyway. So I kind of felt like I was a bit wrong because I wasn't very good at anything else. But I was very much aware that kids at school would look at my paintings, and I kind of got a kind of respect from the bullies because they would look at my stuff and they couldn't do it, basically. So giving them a bit of an edge.
So I suppose when you're at school, like everyone, you're treading water and you want to be accepted, I suppose, or if you, particularly from peers.
Hugely. I mean, people talk about self-esteem and self-worth, and that does come partially from what you do, but still to this day, if I'm at a wedding or some sort of gathering, and I'm chatting to a, air quotes, businessman type person,
Sure.
And they ask me what I do, I still will have someone say, so what do you do for a living? I say, well, I'm an artist. And they'll say, so what do you do for a living? And I say, well, I'm an artist. And there's this moment where they look me up on their phone, and then they see that, you know, I travel around the world. And it's swapping from the what did you do when you were young to the present. I quite like the fact that from a business person's standpoint, I've been successful as an individual and an entrepreneur, as well as being that kid in the 60s and 70s that painted pictures, because it's a bit like a success, the fact that you can monetize art.
Sure.
Not that I would think in those terms, because when I kind of started work in the early 80s, I was aware that painting images for book covers and advertising campaigns, it wasn't. It went from a glorified hobby to the only way I'm going to be able to carry on renting this flat is if I have the money. And
of course.
You can't keep going to your parents asking for another £400 because of, for your own self-esteem.
Of course.
So, but I did rapidly earn money, and then I realised I was completely self-sufficient painting pictures, and that felt great. And it's actually rare.
Yeah.
There aren't many people who manage to sustain 40 years worth of a career making marks on paper.
I mean, that's incredible. It's an incredible sort of, those two things of being able to make a career out of art for that period of time is a credit to yourself. Anyway, was there a time where you felt like, so I know you went to university, didn't you?
Art college.
Yeah, which university did you go to?
Well, you do your foundation year in your own town, which was in Cardiff in the late 70s, and I went to Brighton Art College for 3 years, and I started work in early 1983. But when I was at art college, I was one of the few who did anything like the kind of work that I do for Magic the Gathering, which was realistic painting.
Sure.
So I've spent most of my life being phenomenally unfashionable, and I'm now realising that it's actually quite an advantage, because I like my record collection and my hairstyle and the way I paint. I've just done one thing like that.
Constantly, slight wibbles,
Yeah, when I was at art college, I didn't fit in, and I've never really fitted in anywhere. And that kind of brings me to this event, is I've always felt, goosebump moment, that I do fit in with the Magic the Gathering crew.
Yeah.
And though I'm the person who does the images on the card, I definitely feel like Magic is like a family of friends, because it feels very safe and warm. And yet when I was doing book covers, that felt like because that's when I first started becoming well known, doing covers for Terry Pratchett, Stephen King and all that lot.
Quite a bit of fantasy as well, didn't you?
Yes.
That's right.
And that was all great, because I established my reputation, and I was doing 3 large paintings a month, which almost killed me by hand. And that was very, very challenging. And then the computers came along, and I ended up being digital for a while.
Yep.
But there was definitely a pivotal point when Magic the Gathering came along, which is now 29 years ago. God, I feel old. Nearly 3 decades. But when I first went to events and I met the gamers, they felt more like people like myself than the people in the art world.
Yeah.
Because in the art world, when I have experienced the gallery type artists and fine artists, I didn't fit in at all, because they had a perceived arrogance to them, or this is special.
Yeah.
And I did, my wife showed my work to a few London galleries, and they wouldn't even look at my portfolio because it was fantasy art.
Right.
So the kind of Magic the Gathering
didn't fit within their norm, basically.
No,
Yeah.
and I'm quite, at 63, if that's the way it is, I'm quite happy to not fit in with that, because I don't like pretension and arrogance. And there's nothing arrogant about the Magic the Gathering lot. We're all kind of like a bunch of dudes.
I think
dudesses.
Yeah, I think the connection between Magic the Gathering players, it's funny, it's called Magic the Gathering, but I think a lot of it is the gathering.
It is.
It's the getting together.
A magical gathering.
It is, yeah.
It is, yes.
That's definitely a really good way of putting it, actually.
I mean, I've only met you 10 minutes ago, and we're already kind of talking like mates.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time.
The amount of times I'm sure you're the same, you'll sit down in front of someone, hi, nice to meet you, within 5-10 minutes, you are talking about everything and anything. And I know just beforehand we were talking about music, which we're both, well, I didn't realise you were so passionate about, and I am as well. It's interesting how you meet these people, you meet these characters, and how easy
we come together, because at the end of the day, we're all in the same sphere to talk about and enjoy the game and the art we love. I just want to talk about the process of how you start a piece. I appreciate this is probably very complicated and it could be long-winded, but how do you start? You know, you've got an idea in mind, or if you're, you know, how does Wizards approach you? Do they say, we've got a piece in mind? Or talk a little bit about your process.
I always think it's their process, and then you bend to the rules of what they need. So before I answer that question, if you're a commercial illustrator, I mean, an illustrator is basically an artist working as a gun for hire. You fit into the needs of them, and I've had this mindset that the client is always right, in so much as I've always thought that it's rather like going shopping, because an art director sort of thinks, I use John for this and Sandra for that, or whatever.
Sure.
And you provide them with a service. So before I answer that question, to me, the reason why I've always had work, touch wood, I'm touching my head.
I don't think you'll ever struggle for work, John.
No, but the reason why I've always had work is that I'm very respectful about the interaction of the process of them using you.
Sure.
Some of my friends hate the idea of being used, but to me, they're choosing me to resolve a problem, because I know art directors, and I've been an art director myself, and an illustrator is someone who resolves a problem for the art director. So starting from the art director's standpoint, they have a need, and that need is to commission out, in the context of Magic the Gathering, a card or a series of cards. So before you or they get to that stage, they've had a team of researchers who work on the style guide and the game dynamics, and then the art department get together a style guide, which in the old days was this physical document that was FedExed to us. Now it's a digital download. So before we even get the commission, they've been working on the set, which is basically the vibe and the look. I always think the classic one is Mirrodin, which was codenamed Metal World. Yeah. Because it was basically an environment of metal, which was quite weird. You think, how can you have metal sea and metal forests and metal grass? And I think, how am I going to illustrate that? So they work that out, because they get concept artists or MTG artists to go in-house to get the style guide together. So then I'm about to answer your question. So you get asked if you have some space, and you say yes or no, and normally you say yes. So most times these I have to say no, unfortunately, but that's because... So you get the commission through, which is a bit of text to illustrate a planes or a creature or a whatever, and then you get the style guide, which you download, and you get a code to get into. It's all very high level, because it's all, and you've already signed all these clauses. You won't show it to anyone, including the cat. Go away. So no one sees it apart from yourself. That's a silly thing to say, but it's Sunday morning. So then you look at the commission, and they'll give you references to page 116, and you get the vibe of a land. And at that point, you then take over. So it's your interpretation of the assignment, which could be a planes, but that planes has to be done in a specific way. So you're influenced by the style guide. Then the process is my process is I'll look at reference. When I can, I'll look at my own photography, or I'll go out with my camera, or I'll look through reference books, and then I do a sketch which goes off to Wizards. And then if you've done your job properly, it goes through, and then in 3 or 4 weeks, they want the colour final, which is, in my case, mostly done digitally, or if I can, I do it by hand. And then you keep your fingers crossed and hope it's accepted. And that bit remains as scary as hell, right? Because I'm very focused on them being happy. Sure. And that's the bit where we go into the psychological side, which is me being a people pleaser, which is quite hard as a human being. But from a client standpoint, if the client's unhappy, I am very unhappy, and that thing of life being tough at the top definitely exists for me, though I'm no way the best illustrator around. I'm well-known human being in Magic the Gathering, but the expectation bit is still very, very hard. So I have art directors saying, I would love to work from you, it'd be awesome and wonderful, and I'm still scared stiff because of the expectation. Does that make sense?
I didn't expect you to say that. I honestly, I mean, I appreciate when you put your work on the line, there's always an anticipation of an acceptance, you know, and I'd imagine that's at any level, from the very top to the very bottom. But even to this, I would have thought that you would have been, you know, you've done it for so long, and you know, you're so well known. I
thought that. So just to anticipate what you're about to say, I thought that in my 60s, and then whatever age I get to, there'd be a bell curve and it would get easier and easier. My experience is it's getting easier technically, but it's getting harder regarding the expectation. It's so hard that I now only do a trickle because I'm so aware of the expectation.
Sure.
But I did think that expectation would ease off, but it's just got... I think it's because I'm aware that... because I've got I've got a multitude of health conditions which also impact on my state of mind, and I periodically get depression, anxiety, and all kinds of things. If a painting's getting difficult, which often they do, it will trigger all kinds of mental health things, and when I'm at that stage, I'm absolutely convinced this is the time when I'll be found out to be a complete fraud, and I'll hand in the job, and they go, John's finally, you know, he hasn't got it anymore. And if that's ego, then fine, but it's more pride and self-worth.
Of course.
Because anyone out there in the world who's sustained a creative job right up to the end, right up to their 60s and 70s and 80s, even 90s sometimes, you have a certain standard. And again, I'm looking at a cricketer over there, and there's the Edgbaston cricket ground there. So most people, including yourself doing this, there's a performance element. So that performance is down to not only your technique and your skills, but your physical well-being. Because if I was sitting here with a migraine headache, I wouldn't be able to talk to you.
Yeah.
So imagine I've got a deadline tomorrow to send a painting off, and I'm doing that with backache, migraine, everything aching. I would still manage to dig deep and get that painting done, but it absolutely physically wrecks me. So I've learned that to maintain that standard, I have to physically be on top of the game. And as I'm getting older, some things are getting better, but other things are getting worse.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So there will be a point where I will literally retire myself, because I don't want to hand in a piece of work that's SHIT.
Of course.
Because as soon as I start doing that, I don't want people to see work that's less than the standard in my head. So
I find creative people are very interesting, because I feel like there is never a peak to their levels and abilities. But which brings me on to the question is, have you ever finished a piece that you've worked on and thought, this is it, this is perfection, this is the best I can do?
No.
No.
The closest I came to was Sarah Angel for Secret Lair, which was a painting of my wife. When I was doing Sarah Angel, which I did those by hand about nearly 3 years ago, because they delayed my Secret Lair for a long time. I was having a very unwell patch, and I'd started some medication that was just settling down. And because it was a painting of my wife, and I wanted it to be an image of that female strength that she certainly has in bucket loads. And she's my best friend, and we've been married for sort of millions of years. And she's my best friend and everything. I wanted to do a painting that was very, very special. But when I started it, I wasn't well, and I was thinking, okay, this might be the very last painting I ever do. So I actually abandoned the first version and dug deep and then started it again. And then I managed to get it, when it was finished, it was quite close to how I wanted it to be. But I was quite nervous when I handed it in, because I thought it might look like a religious painting.
Sure. Because
it borders on that line of it being in a cathedral or something. I was thinking, is this a bit too much of a religious painting?
I think the character does, though, doesn't it? The character does, and obviously the passion and the love for your wife has gone into that, and that's probably why, you know, I'm speaking, obviously I'm sure it could be true, that's why it's probably gone to that level, but that's absolutely fascinating.
But when I first went to the early sketches, I had Pat doing the Sarah Angel flying thing with the sword, doing the kick-ass stuff, and I thought, this has already been done so well. And I was sitting in the lounge thinking, how can I do this? And I was just looking across at the window. It's about as far away as that window there, and I thought, I'll just have it as if the angel's there.
Yeah.
And how would you feel, how would we feel right now if Sarah Angel appeared there? And that's often the way I resolve my paintings. I take it right down to a human being in a room, and that's why that painting is it's just there.
Of course.
It's the classic sort of triangle design shape.
I love hearing about the process, John. I know you're a busy man, and I know you've got to go.
Well, I've got to go.
I know, but I'm gonna sign off for sort of saying thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
I've loved every single second of it, and I'm sure the audience has as well.
I'm sorry we couldn't talk anymore.
Of course,
it's as good as we can.
Yeah, you're a busy man, and I'm just thankful for the time you've given me. But I much appreciate it, and hopefully I look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Okay.
Thank you very much, John.
All right, thanks.